I bought my lakeside property to disappear, not to be discovered. The house sat tucked between pines and silence, the kind of place you could hear your thoughts echo and your coffee cool. I'd left the corporate world behind after selling my startup, hoping to swap spreadsheets for sunsets. For 6 months, that's exactly what I got, until the HOA decided Paradise wasn't profitable enough. It started small, as these things do. Flyers appeared in mailboxes promising community development and increased property value. Then came the meetings, packed with smiling neighbors and that one guy in a golf polo who always spoke like he'd been born holding a microphone. His name was Greg, the HOA president. He talked about opportunity. About how our lake, our underutilized asset, he called it, could become a destination. A boutique resort, a golf course, maybe even a spa. I remember leaning back in my chair, watching people nod. It was the same look I used to see in investor meetings when someone heard the word billions. "Just think of what this will do for your home values," Greg said, spreading his arms like a preacher at a sermon. I raised my hand. "And who's funding this little dream?" He smiled. "We'll create a holding company. The HOA will own it. You'll all get fractional shares." Translation: they'd spend everyone's money, control everything, and claim the profits. I'd seen this movie before, only this time the boardroom had a view of the lake. When I objected, Greg gave me the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Some of us are visionaries," he said. "Some of us just like quiet," I replied. He laughed politely, but his tone shifted. "You can't stop progress, my friend." He was right about that part. Within months, trucks rolled in. They tore down trees, dredged parts of the shoreline, and built concrete foundations where wildflowers used to bloom. The air smelled like diesel and wet dirt instead of pine and water. My once hidden paradise turned into a construction site. Neighbors who'd voted for the plan started complaining about noise and dust. But by then, Greg had leveraged the HOA funds into private loans and locked in investors. The resort was inevitable. And just like that, my view became a half-finished luxury resort with a billboard that said, "The Shores at Silver Pine, opening soon." At first, I considered selling and leaving. I had the money. But something about the arrogance of it all, the way they assumed they could build on a lake they didn't own, started a quiet spark in me. I didn't want to fight them. I wanted to outsmart them. So I called a friend from my old world, someone who owed me a favor. He was a real estate attorney, and when I told him what was happening, he laughed for a full minute before saying, "Please tell me they didn't check the water rights." "They didn't," I said. "Then, my friend, you might already own their resort." That was the day I learned something important. The HOA had jurisdiction over the properties, but the lake itself, its water rights, shoreline access, and substructure, were still owned by whoever held the original charter from the 1940s logging company that built the dam. After some digging through county archives, my lawyer found that the last transfer of those rights was decades old, and the corporation that owned them had quietly dissolved, which meant they could be bought from the state, the entire lake. So I did. It took a week of legal paperwork, a few phone calls, and one small trust fund I'd almost forgotten about. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, a PDF hit my inbox with 6 words that changed everything. Transfer of water rights, Silver Pine Lake. I didn't build fences. I didn't call the press. I waited. By midsummer, the resort stood half-finished, money running tight, investors breathing down Greg's neck. They threw a launch event anyway, complete with a ribbon-cutting ceremony and champagne flutes. That's when I showed up. Greg blinked when he saw me walking down the dock in a gray suit, holding a manila folder. "Didn't think you'd show," he said. "Oh, I wouldn't miss it," I replied. "You're opening your resort today, right?" He grinned nervously. "Our resort, yes. It's for everyone." I opened the folder and handed him a single page. He scanned it, his face draining of color. "What is this?" he whispered. "Deed to the lake," I said. "You built your resort on my water." Behind him, guests were taking selfies and sipping champagne, oblivious. "You can't," he started, but I interrupted. "Actually, I can. Every pier, every water-based structure, every dock, every pipe leading into or over the lake requires my consent. which, at the moment, doesn't exist. He stared at me like I'd just rewritten gravity. I smiled. But don't worry, Greg. I'm a businessman, not a monster. I'm sure we can work something out. He didn't know it yet, but I'd just become the silent partner in every future dollar they'd make. And that was only the beginning. Greg didn't sleep much after that day. You could tell by the way he showed up at my dock 2 mornings later. Sunglasses, coffee, and the look of a man trying to pretend everything was fine while his house was quietly burning. He started with fake friendliness. Hey, listen, we might have gotten off on the wrong foot. You know how paperwork can get messy. Messy? I said, leaning on the rail. Greg, you built a $40 million resort on land you don't control. That's not messy. That's ambitious. He didn't laugh. Instead, he handed me a non-disclosure agreement and said, "The board wants to negotiate." I smiled. Of course they do. We met that afternoon in what used to be the community clubhouse, but now looked like a luxury sales office. Maps, mock-ups, champagne bottles, fake smiles. The whole HOA board was there, pretending they hadn't made the biggest mistake of their lives. They started offering numbers. 10,000, 50,000, even 100,000 for access rights. I let them talk until they ran out of optimism, then slid the folder back across the table. I'm not interested in rent, I said. I'm interested in ownership. Greg frowned. Ownership of what? The resort, I said. All of it. You could have heard the lake breeze through the windows. They sputtered, protested, laughed nervously. Greg even tried the "we're all neighbors" line. But I had the one thing they didn't, leverage backed by law. They'd already sunk millions into construction, loans, permits, and marketing. If I revoked their water access, every penny evaporated overnight. No boats. No guests, no operation, no resort, so I gave them a week to think about it. By Friday, they called. The HOA had convinced the investors to meet privately, hoping to cut a deal. I expected a fight. Instead, I found opportunity. The investors weren't idiots. They knew sunk costs when they saw them. The lead backer, a sharp woman named Elena, studied me for about 5 minutes before asking, "What do you actually want?" I told her, "Control. You get your money back and a stake in something bigger. I'll take over management, handle the legal cleanup, and expand this beyond a resort." "Expand it into what?" she asked. "A lifestyle brand," I said. "Waterfront communities, fractional ownership, high-end eco-retreats, the kind that make billionaires pretend to be minimalists for a weekend." She leaned back, considering it. "And what's your background again?" I smiled. "Tech. I know how to scale things." 2 weeks later, the paperwork was done. The HOA relinquished control of the development to a new holding company, mine, in exchange for clearing their debts and avoiding lawsuits. Elena's investors came on board as minority partners. Greg quietly resigned for personal reasons. I renamed the property Silverpine Ventures and the resort. It became the Lake House, the flagship of a brand that would soon span 3 states. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same people who'd voted to destroy my peace were now mailing me congratulatory letters, bragging that they knew me before the success. But I wasn't finished. To scale, I needed more than one lake, so I started acquiring. Not land, water rights. Old, forgotten, undervalued bodies of water owned by defunct corporations and bankrupt developers. I bought them quietly through shell companies, just like I'd learned in tech. Own the infrastructure, and you own the ecosystem. Within a year, we controlled 10 lakes and had partnerships with 5 eco-hospitality brands. Silverpine Ventures became the backbone of a $1 billion valuation. And the HOA? They didn't even realize they'd become tenants until the renewal notices arrived. That part was delicate. I wasn't cruel. I offered fair leases and generous buyout options. But the truth was simple. Their homes sat on land that depended on my water. The community they'd built without me now floated on my terms. Some left, some stayed. The ones who stayed got to enjoy world-class amenities they couldn't afford before. The ones who left watched the property values soar and wished they hadn't sold. As for Greg, he tried to sue. Claimed I'd tricked him that the HOA hadn't known. The court dismissed it before lunch. The Judge S words still make me smile. Ignorance is not a defense when you build a resort on someone else's lake. By the second year, the lake house was featured in travel magazines, and I was on the cover of Business Weekly under the headline, "The Man Who Bought the Lakes." Investors called, venture capitalists circled, and major hospitality chains tried to partner. I wasn't interested in partnerships. I was building an empire from the one thing no one had thought to monetize properly: serenity. Still, something in me missed the quiet. So I built myself a small cabin, right on the opposite shore of Silver Pine. No cameras, no noise, no schedule. Just the way it had been before the HOA's bright ideas. But I couldn't help smiling when I watched the lights of the resort flicker across the water each night, because every room, every dock, every wave now whispered the same reminder. They'd tried to own me. Instead, I'd bought everything they built, and I wasn't done yet. The first real money arrived disguised as an offer I wasn't supposed to refuse. A major hospitality conglomerate invited me to partner on global expansion. Their executives flew in on a private jet, wearing smiles so polished you could see your reflection in them. They wanted a controlling share of Silver Pine Ventures in exchange for access to international markets. Translation: they wanted the name, the brand, and the data behind it. I thanked them for their interest and told them I'd think about it. Then I spent the next 3 weeks building what they actually wanted: a data model. We'd been quietly collecting metrics from our resorts: occupancy rates, environmental impact readings, guest spending, even lake water purity levels. Combined, it was a blueprint for sustainable luxury. I realized that Silver Pine wasn't just a hospitality company anymore. It was an algorithm for serenity. So I leaned into that. We built predictive software that mapped emotional satisfaction against environmental variables. If wind speed dropped below a certain threshold, we played softer music through shoreline speakers. If humidity rose, scent diffusers adjusted automatically. Guests never noticed, they just felt better. That became our pitch. Luxury that listens. The media loved it. Investors loved it more. Suddenly, Silver Pine wasn't a quirky resort born out of a neighborhood feud. It was the future of experiential living. At conferences, people asked how I'd thought of it. I told them the truth. It started because someone tried to sell me peace and quiet that was already mine. That line ended up in Forbes. Within months, venture funds were throwing money at us. I used the cash to buy out Elena and the early investors at generous returns. Never burn the bridges that built your empire. Then I restructured the company for IPO preparation. Meanwhile, the old HOA community had transformed beyond recognition. The dusty cul-de-sacs now held boutique stores and electric boats for rent. Greg's old house? We turned it into a design center called The Hub, where guests could learn about eco-construction and sustainable tech. Irony has a beautiful rhythm, but the growth came with problems. Scaling Serenity is harder than scaling software. The lakes had to be protected, and expansion meant risk. So I created an internal department called the Stewardship Council. Scientists, economists, and ethicists, all paid better than executives, to make sure the water stayed as pure as our balance sheet. Investors thought it was marketing. It wasn't. It was insurance. One night, while reviewing a new acquisition deal in northern Italy, my CFO asked me what my endgame was. "You've already won," she said. "Why keep going?" I looked out over the dark water outside the villa. Because every empire that forgets where it started collapses. I started at a lake. I'll finish at one. By the time the company went public, Silver Pine Ventures was valued at $4.7 billion. My personal share was just over 60%. The IPO party took place fittingly at the original Lake House Resort. Champagne flowed where sawdust once fell. News drones buzzed overhead, catching perfect reflections of the fireworks in the still water. I made a short speech. I didn't mention the HOA or Greg or the months of noise and diesel. I simply said, "Peace of mind is the rarest real estate on earth." The crowd applauded, reporters scribbled, my PR team cried. But after the crowd thinned, I walked down to the old dock, the one where Greg had first confronted me with that smug grin. The same wood, though it had been refinished to a mirror shine. I slipped my shoes off and let my feet touch the water. That night, a decision crystallized. I was going to sell. Not for greed, but for freedom. Over the next 6 months, I negotiated privately with 3 global buyers. Only one truly understood what Silver Pine was worth. They weren't in hospitality. They were in technology. They saw the predictive algorithms, the emotional mapping, the sustainability patents. They wanted the engine beneath the brand. Their offer, $8.6 billion all cash, plus lifetime royalties on any derivative technology. I said yes. The closing took place in a conference room with windows that looked over the same lake where it had all begun. My lawyer slid a pen across the table and whispered, "You know, most people retire after a sale like this." "I'm not most people," I said. "I'm just a guy who likes quiet water." When the deal closed, I became the majority owner of Peace itself, and a billionaire several times over. The announcement made headlines around the world. Reporters descended on Silver Pine, calling it the most profitable HOA dispute in history. Greg's name reappeared in the press for all the wrong reasons. He declined interviews. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The sound of the wind over the lake said enough. I thought that would be the end of it. But the truth is, every success ripples outward. After the sale, the new owners began modernizing the resorts even further, pushing tech integration, automation, AI guests assistance. It was impressive and soulless. The lakes felt quieter but emptier, as though the serenity had been digitized. That's when the idea for my next move began to form. Something beyond business, beyond even money. Because sometimes to protect peace, you have to buy it back. When the wire transfer cleared, I expected silence to feel like victory. It didn't. It felt like a held breath. The resort ran smoother than ever under its new corporate owners, but the place had lost its heartbeat. They replaced cedar with carbon fiber, smiles with service bots, and local suppliers with logistics algorithms. Guests still came, yet no one lingered by the water anymore. They stared at screens that told them how calm they were supposed to feel. I visited one evening under a false name, just to see it through their eyes. The dock gleamed like glass. The same water rippled softly below, but the air smelled like ozone instead of pine. A holographic sign hovered over the lake. Silver Pine Experience 2.0. That night, I realized what ID actually built. A company that proved serenity could be bought, but not kept. So I started buying it back. Quietly, through a private fund, I began purchasing the land beneath the technology, small parcels, forgotten coves, unlisted deeds. My team of lawyers worked in silence. The new corporation didn't even notice. Their spreadsheets saw it as minor local acquisitions. By the time they caught on, I held every inch of shore that mattered. I didn't need their servers or their branding. I had the earth, the trees, the ground their guests walked on. When I finally revealed the plan, I invited the executives to the old clubhouse, the same one where Greg and his board had once pitched their dream. The walls had been rebuilt in glass and steel now, but the view hadn't changed. "I'm not here to fight," I told them. "I'm here to offer you an exit." They stared, wary. "I'm creating a conservation trust," I said. "Silver Pine Legacy. It will own the physical lakes and shorelines. You'll license access for 5 years, then we close them to development forever." One of them scoffed. "You're asking us to buy ourselves out of our own business?" "No," I said, sliding the folder forward. "I'm asking you to accept Peace as a limited-time lease." They didn't laugh, but they signed. The payout was generous, cheaper than a public scandal, and cleaner than another lawsuit. When the deal cleared, the trust officially controlled all former Silver Pine sites worldwide. I hadn't just sold the company for billions. I'd bought the lakes back for good. 2 months later, bulldozers left the shoreline. Drones stopped buzzing overhead. The resort lights went dark one by one until only the moon remained, reflected on still water. I walked the dock barefoot, same as always. Greg showed up that night. He looked older, quieter. He'd found out I was back and wanted to see for himself. "You really did it," he said softly. "You bought everything." "Not everything," I said. "Just enough." He nodded, staring across the dark lake. "So what happens now?" "Nothing," I said. "That's the point." For the first time in years, Silver Pine returned to silence. The trust opened the area to researchers, hikers, and anyone who needed stillness more than Wi-Fi. I spent most mornings there alone, sketching ideas for the next project I'd probably never start. Reporters called it the most poetic corporate exit in modern history. Investors called it insanity. I called it symmetry. Every empire wants an ending. Mine ended where it began, on calm water, under open sky, with no one left to argue about what peace was worth. I'd learned that progress isn't always forward. Sometimes it's a slow circle back to the dock you started from. When the sun rose over the lake the next morning, it looked exactly like it had the day I moved here. Gold on the ripples, pine shadows stretching long, air so clean it felt like forgiveness. I poured a cup of coffee, listened to the wind, and smiled. The HOA had once tried to own the lake, then the world tried to own the peace. Now the lake owned itself, and for the first time I finally belonged to it again.